Welcome to Culturally Appropriate Episode 10. I'm your host, Jerod Holyfield. We have a packed show today. I don't know that we can really call it a live stream, considering our two primary interviews were pre-recorded, but it's that time of year, and people are not always able to make it at noon on a Friday. So first, we are going to talk to Ryan Whitaker, who directed the amazing new film Surprised by Oxford that had its theatrical premiere last week and will be coming to home video viewing, VOD, and all of these other platforms very soon. Ryan was nice enough to join us from London earlier this week, where he was promoting Surprised by Oxford. Next, we are going to do a post-mortem of the Nashville Film Festival, which is actually still going on virtually, but the live events are over. And my guest and friend from most of the festival, Davis Hunt, will be here, editor-in-chief of The Pamphleteer, to talk about our experiences. And then we are actually going to go back to being a live show toward the end with our weekly film rundown, The Exorcist Believer edition. So my first guest, as I mentioned, is Ryan Whitaker, who directed Surprised by Oxford. I wrote a review of this particular movie last week as kind of my main article. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Ryan. Well, our first guest today is filmmaker Ryan Whitaker, who had a big week last week when his feature film Surprised by Oxford premiered nationwide and in London. And if you were lucky enough to see the movie on Wednesday or Sunday, you know exactly why we have him on the program. It's a wonderful movie. It's probably the best movie about faith that I have ever seen. I would put it up there with films like Last Temptation of Christ, The Passion of the Christ. And, you know, it's definitely showing a new way to break out of some of the old stereotypes of faith-based film that are still going on at the multiplex every couple of weeks. So, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on Culturally Appropriate. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks, Jerod.
And I understand
that was high praise. So I'm not sure I deserve that, but I appreciate that very kind introduction.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the great things about this job is just like finding these movies and just championing them whenever, you know, they're out. And I love doing it whenever they're different genres too, just because, I mean, I feel like a lot of times people just put up those genre silos and they might not watch something outside of their wheelhouse. So,
your review was so kind and so thoughtful, the way you engaged with the film and kind of picked up on a lot of the things we were trying to do. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks. Yeah, I absolutely love the movie. So I understand you are currently actually back on the terrain of the movie in London right now promoting it. Is that right?
I am. I'm in my hotel room in London as we speak.
Great. So I think maybe for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with your work, I think maybe they would like to know how you got started, how you got from, you know, making independent films in Nashville to shooting overseas and now doing this European press tour.
Well, how much time do you have?
As much really as you want.
It's also really boring, some of it. No, you know, I grew up wanting to make movies. As a kid, I wanted to be an animator. I just turned 40 a few weeks ago, and so I was kind of at the perfect age for sort of that renaissance of Disney animation as a kid, and so in the late 80s, early 90s, and so that's what I wanted to do. And at some point, I started running around with a family camcorder, making movies with my brother and my friends, and so the focus just sort of shifted into live action. And so that, yeah, I just, you know, for as long as I can remember, I wanted to tell stories and tell visual stories. And it took me, you know, several years to get to a point where I was ready to actually make a movie, and that was in actually at the end of 2010. I shot my first feature film, which was called After. It was a sort of Twilight Zone inspired kind of fantasy indie feature that I shot in Alabama. And that movie, it sort of, we spent way too long in post, and the film finally released in 2012. And then kind of for the next decade, I just was, you know, trying to make ends meet. I was working on, you know, other kind of video projects, commercial gigs and things like that. All the while, you know, developing different projects and scripts. And I read Carolyn Weber's memoir, Surprised by Oxford, 5 years ago, when it was recommended to me by my mom and my sister. They said it was like everything I loved in a book. It was It was Oxford. It was about the Inklings. It was sort of, Christian apologetics and a lot of the things that I was interested in. And I read the book and just, sort of fell in love with the story and immediately saw the cinematic potential of it. And the fact that it was set in Oxford was obviously a huge draw, the idea of being able to film there on location. And, the rest is history. It took me, several more years to get the film off the ground. And we shot the film at the end of 2021 in Oxford. And here we are almost 2 years later releasing it.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about your producer? I know that I first kind of came in contact with all of you when I was doing a story about the filmmaking community in Franklin, which is quite impressive. I mean, especially for a city of Nashville's size, that we have, but there's almost like a group of directors who are releasing these features nationwide pretty regularly. Do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship with Ken? Because I know I first discovered Ken Carpenter, your producer, through the movie Finding You during the pandemic, which also blew me away in a similar manner to Surprised by Oxford. And he seems like somebody that really loves Franklin, but he also really loves travel because there's all these Tennessee-based movies that are shooting in Ireland or in Oxford. So can you talk about the relationship with Ken and sort of how that developed?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've known Ken for, a long time, probably 20 years. Ken and his brother they had a production company in Franklin for years called Franklin Films, and they were doing music videos and EPKs and commercial projects and documentaries and things like that. And so I knew Ken for a long time, and he sort of shifted into producing features, I think in the last decade, less than 10 years ago. And so we would bump into each other now and then and, talk about what we were working on. And at some point I shared a draft of the script for Surprised by Oxford with him. And actually, the funny thing is, I think he read the first draft the night before he left for Ireland to shoot Finding You. And so it was the worst possible timing, to share the project with Ken. And then when he, sometime later, he came home and kind of re-engaged with the material and we began to talk about it, and he just really caught a vision for it. And, when the right team sort of assembles around a project, there's just sort of a collective energy, and Ken was kind of the beginning of that, at least the kind of the resurgence of the project kind of coming back to life because we had tried for so long to get it made. So it was Ken and then the team at Evolve Studios, and then Ascendant Fox in the UK came on board, Hester Ruoff and Bart Ruspoli. And and then, from there we were sort of off to the races.
And something I really appreciate about your work and Ken's work, and Davis and I, my editors, we've been covering the Nashville Film Festival this week, have talked a lot about it because it seems like you all are doing this because you love it. Like you just love movies. And I know just from our conversations, I can get that. And it's a very different sort of way of going about the industry than like somebody just kind of making stuff to be famous. Or, I mean, I feel like you're the kind of filmmaker that doesn't make a movie unless like their heart's in the right place for it and they really feel like it needs to be made, as opposed to just like, I'm going to make this and have some cool shots and like put stuff in festivals. So what really kind of inspires you? Because I know you had that 10-year break, and I don't know, movies are exhausting, but what was it about Surprised by Oxford that was just like, I have to make this movie. I've got to get back in the kitchens.
Well,
feature.
Make no mistake, I would happily have made a few more movies in between. So maybe even some just because of the cool shots. I don't know. But, it's like, this is such a tough business, and it's just so hard to get any film off the ground. I mean, really, any film that gets made is like a minor miracle, right? It's just so difficult. And to make something that's even decent, let alone good, is like an even bigger miracle. And so, I sort of grew up. It's interesting you talk about Franklin. Franklin is I actually grew up in Franklin. I've lived in Franklin since I was 5 years old. And, a lot of the sort of faith-based movie, community lives in that area. Not exclusively, obviously they're spread out around the country, but it is kind of in a way sort of the epicenter of it. And I was surrounded by that. My dad is a Christian musician, and so I could sort of grew up in the middle of kind of the church culture, Christian entertainment, all of that. And so I ran the opposite direction, not personally, but just sort of in terms of kind of the stories I wanted to tell. I always wanted to tell mainstream stories. And so that's why my first film was not at all a faith-based film. It was just this little indie thriller, kind of with some touches of sci-fi and fantasy. And I really wanted to make genre films. And in the years after that film released, that was kind of mainly where I was spending my time in terms of the stories I was developing. I really had no interest in doing the faith movie thing because I had seen it done and it just didn't interest me. So it really wasn't until I read the book that I thought I could maybe find a way in that was a different path in from what I had seen. And I think it was that Carolyn's book was, it approached faith in sort of an intellectual way. I mean, it's set in Oxford. It's all these kind of dense conversations with very smart, well-read people talking about faith and life. And I really appreciated the fact that, her friend group, it's obviously a true story, these people that she's writing about, but that the friend group in this story was very diverse, and it was people from all walks of life. You had people that were people of faith. You had people that had no faith at all. You had people that were somewhere in between, more agnostic, and but she never judged any of these people, but just sort of portrayed them as real people that were part of her journey and her story. And so there was no like evil atheist character in the story, that she had to fight. It just wasn't that kind of story. And so I just really appreciated the kind of the messy complexity of it, and that it felt more real life. And I thought if there was a way to tell that story and come at the material in from that perspective. And also her book is published by a prominent Christian publisher, and it is ultimately a story of conversion. But it basically opens with her college professor telling her that her purpose in life is to discern the real from the bullshit. And so I loved that, like her story, like from the get-go, right out of the gate, said this is not going to be your typical Christian conversion story. And so I really wanted to retain that in the film and sort of make a film that reflected that kind of that messiness.
Yeah, and one of my favorite scene is the pen scene, but my second favorite scene is the scene where she like goes and gets drunk at the party, and I guess Rosary just plays like a really good fake drunk in that scene, and it's hilarious because those scenes usually are just like, oh, this is kind of
she was really drunk,
but yeah, I mean that scene just like that was something you wouldn't see in sort of the kind of Christian movie that we're talking about. And I loved, and I've quoted this to a lot of people as I've been promoting the movie, because some people would be like, oh, I don't really want to go see a Christian movie. I'm like, well, it's not. And I tell them your concept of faith adjacent that you and I talked about the first time that I ever spoke to you. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think that's a great way to describe this particular movie and really some of the other Christian films that have been coming out over the past year. I mean, this has been a very big year for movies about faith, and I think some have been very successful. Some have been surprisingly successful, like The Hill with Dennis Quaid, I thought was a really solid film. And then, I think Jesus Revolution too kind of proves that, these stories can actually kind of branch out from normal. So that idea of faith adjacent, what do you mean by that when you say that?
Well, I honestly don't really like the term. I'm only repeating it because I've heard it. It's like, I don't really like the term faith-based or faith adjacent. Like these I don't know. I just, it makes me cringe a little bit, if I'm being completely honest. But I think what faith adjacent sort of speaks to is this idea that it's a story that is hopefully a story that would speak to a mainstream audience, but touches in some way on faith in a way that is ultimately not preachy or didactic. So I think in that sense, the film we made hopefully is that. I think in the past we've seen a lot of faith films that seem to sort of exist for the sole purpose of proselytizing or preaching a message. And I've always sort of described it as, it's like a sermon with enough kind of narrative scaffolding to hold it up. And it's just not, I think it's the wrong way in. to telling a compelling story. And so so I think this term faith adjacent or faith light, is just means it's a story that hopefully has mainstream appeal, but in some way has a faith component or speaks to that. Like Sound of Freedom would be a good example of a movie like that.
Yeah, and it also seems weird to me that you're releasing on a week when the movie Gareth Edwards is the creator, which has a lot of biblical symbolism and honestly a lot.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm dying to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's from everything that I've seen, and I've not gotten a chance to either, but it does have like a very faith undertone. I mean, everything is like a faith allegory in that particular movie. And then you've got Scorsese's new movie, which, I mean, when Scorsese makes a movie, it's about Catholicism, but he doesn't get pegged into this bubble for some reason.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
I feel like there is this broader conversation, and your movie really does bridge that. But I just hate that stigma that like anytime a movie is directly about faith and it's not an allegory or it's not a filmmaker with belief behind what they do, they kind of get a pass on it. But if you attack it head on or deal with the subject, you're kind of thrown into that faith-based adjacent ghetto. I also wanted to talk about.
I think I mean just really quick on that. I would just say like it's been interesting to see just sort of the gamut of reactions to the film, because you do have people who critics who clearly just sort of are predisposed to dislike anything that has to do with faith, right? And then so that comes through kind of in their take on the film, and then there are people who think it doesn't have enough faith, which has been really interesting to sort of see that response. And some of those people who are people who know the book really well. And it is true that the film is much more subtle sort of in its treatment of faith than the book. I mean, the book is very overt because it is a true story. And I mean, they get into these, very deep conversations about, biblical manuscripts and, all this. So they get into the weeds on everything, right? And like deep theological issues. And so we definitely took a different approach in the film. And so I think you have that, like, it's just fascinating to see sort of the different reactions that, and then there are people like, I think like yourself who found it refreshing that it was sort of, that it came at it, the subject matter in a different way, than it was less heavy-handed.
And speaking of the adaptation process, I mean, this is one of those adaptation situations that I would imagine was climbing a mountain, because you have a 500-page book that you've got to distill into like an hour and a half. And you have a lot of talking that is not cinematic whatsoever. And, make no mistake, this is a very cinematic movie. It's gorgeously shot. And the way that you handle the dialogue, the sort of the rom-com banter, I mean, the movie's got the dialogue has a great rhythm to it. So can you talk a little bit about how you got the book to screen and some of the major issues you had to navigate through the process? Because you also have fans of the book who are already going to be predisposed to say, oh, the book was better, and then just kind of leave the theater, even though they're happy the movie came out. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the book is about 400 pages, so it's not 500, but 400 is still a lot. And I mean, it's this huge narrative of Carolyn's time at Oxford, and it's not structured like a movie. It takes a bunch of sort of detours. There are a ton of sort of peripheral characters and people that she encounters and interacts with while at Oriel College, which is where she went to school. We changed that in the film, but I can explain that. But I mean, I think the first order of business was just kind of figuring out sort of the basic narrative structure, the basic structure of the movie. What did it want to be? And, you mentioned that there's some rom-com dialogue. I just never really thought of the movie in terms of genre, is the honest truth. Like I just, and if I had to describe it, I would probably describe it as a romantic drama. But then it's interesting that people have like definitely called it a rom-com. And I think it does sort of check some of those boxes. And so it sort of sits in between genres in a way that I actually think is kind of interesting and was one of the things that appealed to me about the story. But I wasn't trying to kind of fully adhere to any of those genres, if that makes sense. I mean, because ultimately Carolyn's story is a faith journey and it's also a romance. It's both of those things at the same time, and they actually inform each other. And so for that reason, that was very, very difficult to navigate, in terms of the adaptation and trying to figure out, the push and pull of that, and how those things needed to be balanced on the page and ultimately on the screen. But then when I started to pitch the project to people, to studios and people like that, it was like they just didn't understand it because of that. I think it just felt like it was it wasn't just one thing. Like the fact that it was trying to do two things at once was kind of an obstacle for some people, but that was always what was interesting to me about it. But in terms of the actual adaptation, I mean, I think it was just starting with sort of the baseline story, like what were the narrative beats of the story structurally, kind of, if you thought of it in terms of a 3-act structure, like what was the basic story structure that this wanted to sort of kind of, fit into. And then how do we tell that story, and how do we kind of jettison, things that aren't ultimately unimportant, in the context of that story. Because Carolyn's book, again, has there's way more than we could ever tell. And so, what were the most important aspects and of that story, and the most important characters. And so, that really became a process of, combining characters, getting rid of some, unnecessary characters, adjusting some of the events. I mean, the film we made is not at all, I wouldn't say at all. It's not the story. It's not the true story, but it is a reflection of the true story. And this Aaron Sorkin line, kept coming to me, and I shared it with Carolyn early in the process, which was when he was working on the Steve Jobs film. He said it's a painting, not a photograph, and that's I kind of kept coming back to that idea that we were making something that hopefully, if you've read the book, you would love the film, because the film sort of harmonizes in some way with the book, and it feels like it captures the spirit of the book. But it is a movie. I mean, and we were trying to make a movie. So, it's all the things you have to do with the true story, condensing events, inventing some things here and there, like you mentioned, the ink, that was an invention for the movie. But it was an invention that made sense to me because it was a sort of a visual metaphor for something that was happening thematically in the story. And it came out of a conversation with Carolyn, where she mentioned that in the Bodleian Library, they don't let you use ink, at least at the time when she was at Oxford. And so that sort of sparked this idea for me. So, it's all the things that you have to do when we were trying to sort of wrestle something this size into 100 minutes.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Aaron Sorkin, because when I'm saying like rom-com dialogue, I'm meaning a lot of the dialogue, I think, because we can kind of think about this movie really as kind of workplace movie, like Aaron Sorkin writes. I mean, you're not dealing with the Oval Office, or you're not dealing with the Oakland A's or Facebook or something like that, but you've got these very smart people talking, and the way that your dialogue just kind of buzzes, especially whenever you have your two leads bantering, it really just gives it this cinematic weight. I mean, it's breezy at the same time as it really does sort of get through a lot of that theological red meat in a way that's incredibly entertaining and develops the characters really well. So that was also one of my favorite things about the movie. So it's kind of, I guess we see the Sorkin influence there, which I think you could do worse than aspire to Aaron Sorkin, right?
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, it's interesting because, one of the other things that people sort of objected to or bumped up against when I would pitch the project is that they were like, an audience doesn't understand all these literary references. Like, these characters are constantly talking about dead people and, poets and authors, and like the audience is going to get totally lost, in this sort of banter about all these academic things. And I just maintained all along that it didn't matter if the audience knew all of the references. The important thing is that the audience needs to believe that the characters do. And I think that that's something that Sorkin has done in his writing really well, which is, you don't, like, I do not know all the ins and outs of, kind of backroom politics in the White House, but I definitely believe that all those characters in The West Wing do, and he just sort of drops you in, in a way where and you just kind of have to find your footing in it. And he's done that I think in all of his writing. And so, obviously we had to talk about, how much is too much and kind of finding the right balance there. But that was something we really worked hard on.
Yeah, and it definitely shows through. Also, one of my favorite things to do is talk movies with you, because I think we like a lot of the same movies. So it's refreshing to be able to sort of see that aesthetic. So, what were some films that you watched that inspired you on this particular project? And then if you have just any other favorite films that you're constantly stealing from or constantly inspiring you.
Well, I always liked. It's funny you talk about Scorsese, because I don't know if I got this from him or, or I don't know, but he always loves to just sort of watch a bunch of films that seem like the right films to watch for a particular project, and so that's something that I always try to do. And sometimes it's like there might be something about a certain film that you don't even fully know why that's the thing that you want to reference, but on this one, I can tell you the stuff I watched was, some of it would make sense, and some of it you'd probably be like, why that? But I watched Linklaters Before a Trilogy again, because I think you could definitely see the influence in some of the sort of walk and talk scenes in this film. I went back and watched a bunch of the Merchant Ivory stuff just because of the sort of Britishness of it, and I think those are beautiful films and really well shot. And I watched David Lean's Summertime again because it's a film that's really ultimately about a place. It's Venice is a character in the story in the way that I wanted Oxford to be a story or a character in the story. I watched. Strangely, went back and watched Kieslowski's Double Life of Veronique again, and then I think I did watch the Three Colors trilogy again. I don't recall exactly what I was looking for. I think maybe it was just sort of a treatment of character, the way the camera interacted with the characters. What else did I watch? Powell and Pressburger's I Know Where I'm Going, because at the beginning of that movie sets up the character's kind of her desire and her want in such a really economical way. And I was trying to find a way to do that in this film where in a very short amount of screen time, we would understand who Carolyn is and what she wants. So that was one that I referenced. And actually, interestingly, we had a much longer version of Act One that we did shoot, and then we cut it way down. To the point where we actually cut an entire character and had to paint him out of the background of some shots to make that work. I feel bad for him, but what else? I don't know. I can't remember. There were several things I watched, but a lot of it was, ultimately about tone and character, and then again, like stuff like Summertime, where it was like films about a place, a specific place, were things that I revisited.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really great list of movies to get inspired by for something like this. And I think the influence and the craft really shows through. It's always nice to see. You can always tell whenever you're watching a movie, like how much knowledge of the medium does the director have. And it feels like, you're not making references like Tarantino, but it's very clear that you love the medium and that you've had a nice long education in the medium as well, because it plays like a lot of these movies beats wise. So today is Sunday. We're pre-recording this interview. I think it's the last day that Surprised by Oxford is playing nationwide, and I think in London as well, for right now anyway. So what is next for Surprised by Oxford, and then what is next for you project wise?
Yeah, so there should be news soon. I don't know if I can talk about it, but there will be news soon about kind of further distribution plans and release windows and things like that. So stay tuned on that. Hopefully there will be actually I know there will be a way very soon for audiences to watch this movie at home. So there should be some announcements about that soon. in terms of projects I'm working on now, I've been in Budapest working on this show, The Pendragon Cycle, with the Daily Wire, and which is a Arthurian legend sort of fantasy show set in 400. So it's a something completely different than Surprise by Oxford, but it's been a lot of fun.
Great. Well, Ryan, I know you're very busy, and I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us for about half an hour. This will be airing on Friday, so I'll send you a link when we get the show put together.
Awesome. Thanks,
And
Jerod. I really
we're
appreciate
looking
it.
forward to having you back in Nashville too. So
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It'll be nice to see my house and my family again at some point.
yeah,
I'm looking forward to that.
I can imagine. All right. Well, good luck and safe travels, and I'm sure we'll see you around town soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Our guest today is Pamphleteer's editor, Davis Hunt. And Davis and I spent a lot of time together this week at the Nashville Film Festival, where I was there every day covering films. The festival is still going on. The live events closed on Wednesday, but if there are any films that you do want to watch, those are available virtually, I think, until Sunday. And you have about 3 days to watch once you purchase tickets. So the live events are there. Some of them have been recorded. In addition to that, we also have a bunch of our local films that Davis and I are probably going to be talking about that are available to watch, including J. Curtis Miller's MK Ultraviolence and Corbin Eaton's A Backlight Production, two guests we've had on the show. Ryan Estabrooks' Reconnecting Roots is not available now, unfortunately. But Davis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm still recovering from all the events of the festival, so I guess it's your show technically, so you can come on anytime you want. But yeah, so you're a lifelong Nashvilleian. You've been around this event. You knew the former programmers. I know that they'd been on the previous show that we worked on together. So, what was your assessment of the festival this year?
Well, I was not there near as much as you were, but I spent two. I saw the shorts block on Friday with Jay's film that you mentioned, and then we saw that Argentinian horror film, which I think we're going to talk about a little later on Sunday night, or what was that, Monday night?
It was Monday night. Yep.
Monday night. And I mean, the main problem logistically with the festival that I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but having screenings go on at various theaters across town that require you to drive between them kind of disjointed the festival and made it feel less like a festival. And when they used to do it at Hollywood 27, the nice thing about that is that people would just kind of hang around that theater all day. You'd hang out there for 3-4 days. You could come and go. People would be hanging out at that little area, the lounge area they had set up outside that had a bar, had some couches, had some chairs and tables, and you could, chat with people and meet people. The festival does not seem set up to accommodate that anymore, which, in my opinion, kind of defeats the whole purpose of meeting people at these things. I mean, there's no other reason that you show your film at a festival other than to connect with other people in the film industry. And if they make that difficult, it kind of begs the question, what's the point?
Right. And something that I know, we hung out on Friday, Saturday, and did one of the happy hours. And I've been to the festival with you before in the past. Part of it, I think, was the splitting up of the venues, but I was shocked at the amount of empty seats in the actual screenings. I mean, I've been going to this film festival since I was in high school, in the early 2000s, and I can't recall ever having less than 30 people in a screening. And not only that, the happy hour that we went to, which was nice, free food, a couple drink tickets, but nobody was really there. So it was a little bit more of a muted event to me, which was kind of a shame. But I know the movie that we saw, When Evil Lurks, or whatever the title of this movie is, When Evil Lurks, the director's representatives were there. I don't know if they were from Argentina, but they were trying to get some feedback from the movie. And basically, I think our party made up half the audience, and we saw it with a group of 6 people. So
yeah,
I mean, have you been to any events that were not that well attended before? Because I was shocked that one of these screenings of a big movie that got a wide release this weekend that I would otherwise be talking about on the rundown just had a dozen people in it.
Yeah, I don't. Can you hear that? You can't hear the video, can you?
I can't hear it, no, but I can see
Okay,
it.
that's fine. Yeah, well, I'm sure that if I was a filmmaker showing my film at the film festival from out of town, I don't know that I would want to go back to Nashville after that experience. I know that, I mean, you talked to a couple of filmmakers one or whose film showed at the Vanderbilt I guess they were doing it at the Vanderbilt Black Box Theater. I don't know. I never made it over there. Somewhere on Vanderbilt's campus, which, as anyone who has tried to navigate Vanderbilt's campus and park and figure all that out, it's very difficult to do, and just not really conducive to kind of this. Like what? Okay, so your screening is at Vanderbilt at this time, and then after that, you're going to drive all the way back to Green Hills for another screening, and then there's like a happy hour over here at Robert's Western World. Uh, you know, it seemed designed to prevent people from seeing movies and and have them look at the city. The Americana Fest is set up in a similar way, but I think that they do that better simply because the events are, I don't know, music is just different. You don't go. There's something about going to a concert that's more transitory. You can kind of pop in and out. You might pop over here for 30 minutes, see this act, and you go see this act on this side of town. It's more conducive to that. But the film festivals just aren't. You go and you sit in a dark room for over an hour and a half at minimum. And yeah.
Yeah, and that was something that I know as I was doing my coverage, because it was pretty exhaustive and exhausting, covering everything that I saw at the festival. There were people here, a lot of people here from out of town. We got a couple of emails from filmmakers, and I got a lot of texts on Sunday, and I think it was just kind of a coincidental thing, but a lot of the events were at Vanderbilt's campus on Sunday, and I got attendees from like people around town. I got emails or texts from audience members who had traveled to the festival just to see some movies, and I got texts from filmmakers from town who were saying like nobody showed up at my Vanderbilt screening, and people were saying there was nowhere to park. They had no clear idea of where the thing was. It didn't show up on Waze or show up on Google Maps. And I know from a couple of people who actually did make it, audience members were in the single to like low double digits for some of these filmmakers that flew all the way out here from LA. And I know that you've played festivals before, and there's nothing more horrible, I feel like, than traveling somewhere, spending money,
Oh
because
yeah.
most festivals for a short can't afford to fly out the filmmakers in the same way that they could one of the keynotes or an actor that was famous, and having like less people watch your movie than would have watched it online. I mean, it really kind of, I use the analogy of it being like a courtesy clerk at a Kroger using self-checkout every day. Like it just kind of like
Yeah,
erases
yeah.
your existence.
Yeah, it'd be humiliating. I mean, I can't imagine. Flying across town, not being able to find the theater. Like a film festival is simple. You rent out a space with projectors and you show movies to people that are there. Like, I don't know why they would complicate with spreading it out over town. I mean, I'm just gonna beat that same drum. I don't know that I have much else to say about it besides that, because in the past it was just so easy to go and hang out there and kind of come and go, and it was nice. I like that. I like going to Hollywood 27, just popping in, seeing who's in the lounge, seeing if you know anyone. If you don't, maybe you go see a movie, maybe you go do something else. Uh, you know, I just don't understand what is wrong with that formula. Maybe it's a budgetary thing. I also have, I also suspect that they don't want to do it at Hollywood 27 anymore. And I'm not sure if I'd heard this or this is just me projecting a little bit, but I do think that crime levels at the Hollywood 27 are such that having the film festival there might be even worse look than having it dysfunctionally run all across town like they've done. So,
Yeah, something that I found was really interesting just in compiling the rundown last night for this week is Hollywood 27 is a ridiculously large theater. It's the biggest theater I think we have in the area, and they've now stopped showing a lot of the like art house indie movies, and they farmed that over to the mall, to Opry Mills or to Regal Green Hills. And I noticed that after we'd had this conversation yesterday about the crime rates in that area, because I mean, back in the day, I mean, it was not the best part of town. I feel like it wasn't the best look for what Nashville is, because you had like a Panda Express and a Panera for food options. but next to a Burlington coat factory or something. But I can see that being kind of one of the major reasons that it didn't happen. I mean, in 2019, I was there and it worked well, but that is a really interesting thing to think about, is that a lot of the movies that would normally be playing at this theater have now moved to these other areas. And as we know, and you posted about on X, formerly known as Twitter, as I'm going to start calling it, even Green Hills got robbed
I feel like
while
that's
the
like
festival was going on, right?
I feel like the X Twitter thing is like a Kiev thing. It's like they're trying to erase our memories of Twitter, which maybe is not the worst thing in the world. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, even Green Hills, we had that massive Gucci heist that happened. So it's not like even that area.
There've been well, I mean, it's funny that we're now talking, but since I think May 1st of this year, there have been 4 bag heists specifically of Louis Vuitton, and I think it's mostly Louis Vuitton. I'd have to verify that, but 4 bag heists of over $40,000 of goods being stolen from Green Hills Mall. That's 4 times since May. Most recently, one happened on Wednesday, and a lot of it, frankly, probably it kind of concentrates around. There's one in June, one in late July. No. Hold on. May 1st, September 14th, and then October 4th, and then there was one in late June, late June. So yeah, I mean, I can understand why. Like think about the dilemma here. Have the festival at Hollywood 27 and risk some embarrassing criminal incident happening, which is increasingly likely over there, especially at that theater specifically. Go to Green Hills. You're kind of in this weird part of town that doesn't really show off the character of Nashville. Do it at the Belcourt. Belcourt's probably expensive to rent out. It's also logistically kind of difficult to park, and if you've got a lot of people going to screenings and stuff, they don't really have the infrastructure set up to manage a large crowd like that. I imagine that's probably the most expensive option is Belcourt. I'm just theorizing here, obviously. Or you do it on, I think those are like the 3 options. So they probably looked at it, no Hollywood 27 for whatever reason. I suspect that that's because it's in just this dead part of town with those criminal problems. And they're like, okay, Belcourt, Green Hills. Didn't they do it one year all at Green Hills though?
It used to be every single year it was at Green Hills. I mean, I've been going to the festival since 2001 when I was in high school, and it was always at Green Hills, and that's really where it grew. And then what happened was in 2017, 2018, Green Hills got the idea. Regal wanted to start putting all those recliner seats in, which is a horrible idea because every single item of clothing that I wore every night at that theater, I came home and had like what looked like cigarette ash down my back from the leather rubbing off. But they put those recliners in and cut the seating down by half. And the problem was the festival, every event would sell out during that period from like maybe 2012 to 2018. So there just weren't enough seats there to have the festival without renting out like 8 or 9 auditoriums. And that was kind of that's what I understand, because Regal Hollywood 27, half of it was recliners and half of it wasn't. And Regal abandoned that idea around the time. So they had the seating there was kind of the pragmatic reason, as far as I understand. I mean, I don't think anybody really wanted to say like, hey, let's move from like one of the most efficient areas of the city where people can like actually stay all day and even have a hotel too. Let's go have the festival next to a Burlington coat factory and a Panda Express. I mean, it was a seating issue, and I guess now that's not the problem. Something that I talked about on Twitter is that we can blame COVID. I kind of saw every once in a while there'd be like one person like wearing a mask huddled in the corner of the whatever screening it was, but these festivals around us, I mean, the Knoxville Horror Film Festival is completely sold out, and not just like ticket wise, but all of their passes are gone. Cucaloris in Wilmington, North Carolina only has 45 passes left now, and it's not even for another month or so. So it's not that the film festival infrastructure is falling apart in the same way people are saying the box office is. It's that there's something logistically wrong here that's happening.
Yeah.
The other issue that I did want to talk to you about is, you went to one screening when we saw Jay's movie, and I know both of us were just kind of looking at each other in annoyance because it was the Tennessee filmmakers block of genre movies, and it was sold out, to its credit. I mean, there was not a seat in the house, but there weren't really, I would say maybe 70% of the audience hadn't even lived in Nashville for 2 years and didn't really even know the landmarks they were shooting at. And I
Yeah.
know, I know you were a little pissed off on the way out that day. So do you want to talk about this a little bit? Because I think it's probably, I don't feel
I wouldn't
I can speak
I
to it
wouldn't
like
s-
you can.
I wouldn't say I was pissed off. I mean, like the reality is that Nashville is and kind of always has been this somewhat transitory city. And so, you got to accept the fact that people are moving here. It's an exciting place to live. I get that. I don't really have any resentment about that, but it is just it just perturbs me that one of the guys shot his short at The Great Escape, which is like right down the street from my house, place that I've been going to for almost 2 decades now. I was there yesterday actually buying some CDs for my car because now I have a CD player. I've downgraded. Um, but he like shot at that place, and I don't. There, you could just tell that he didn't really understand that the Great Escape's position in that area and kind of how well known it is on that side of town. I think I guess a residency requirement would fix this. Like you have to live in that have lived in Nashville for 2 years. I mean, how would they? That would just be like an honor system thing, though. I mean, how would they like vet that? The main thing is that I didn't feel like any of those films were specifically about or set in Nashville in any way. They all felt like everywhere films. Weirdly enough, I guess the one that was set in The Great Escape called Marbles, that was about the singer who comes back from, I don't know, like what, it's like a horror trope. He like kills the girl by playing the guitar or something. It's a music short, so it incorporated the industry, I suppose. So it had this kind of slight Nashville inflection and the setting. Jay's film is set kind of in the rural areas around Nashville. I mean, that one, I think that film probably could have only taken place in the South, just kind of some of the aesthetic sensibilities of it, but it's not wedded specifically to Nashville. But I think that's kind of there's some space there, but I don't know. There's something I would like to see filmmakers here in town making stuff about Nashville, that is actually inflected with Nashville. It could be as simple as setting your, yeah, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's I feel like one of the major identity crises. The festival's always tried to navigate that pretty well, but one of the major things that happens at a festival as big as Nashville is that whenever you have these people coming in from LA and New York, and you have industry people coming in, which used to happen. I don't think Variety magazine is even a sponsor anymore because they used to throw a lot of money and send some reporters down here to cover the festival. But there's always kind of this idea of the local film, which a lot of festivals that are regional, that are pretty big, like New Orleans or the Austin Film Festival, have navigated pretty well. And Indie Memphis has done a great job at this too, where you really do want to like sustain good filmmaking talent in the region. And we've got that talent. I mean, I feel like Jay's somebody that was really great. I saw some really good comedy shorts. And one of the shorts that I liked the most, I think the filmmaker just moved from Nashville to Los Angeles, and it kind of blew me away, the short Horny Kid. But for the most
Oh yeah,
part, it's like
so good.
there's almost this like grab bag. But the weird thing about the festival this year is like I know a lot of filmmakers who made pretty good work who didn't get in, but the way that they did the actual programming in blocks, like the comedy shorts block was an hour long. The place block had a feature in it with a couple of shorts, and then Jay's genre block. So you had a lot of films that just weren't there. And even extending to the features, I saw this horrible, horrible, horrible movie made by a local. There's Horny Kid. Yeah, it's just a great, great movie. I need to, if I
Yeah,
use
this
Letterboxd,
is
I would
worth a
just
watch.
rave about it. I hope it's available online soon. But movie, it sold out. Like that was one of the most well-attended screenings. I don't think there was another seat available. But this filmmaker has made like 3 terrible movies now, and they play Nashville and play nowhere else. and I don't know like what relationship she has to the festival, but it's really frustrating because I mean, you just imagine somebody like, oh, I'm gonna go check out some local films, and maybe Nashville's cool like Austin, and like you've got Richard Linklater's and Jeff Nichols here and people they're mentoring or whatever, and then you go see this movie and you're like, wow, like this is not the festival that I thought it was, which is a bad look. I don't really know how to fix that, but at the same time,
I don't know.
it's really frustrating.
I think you need a figure like Linklater. Like Linklater's films, sorry, I'm pulling up the map just so people that are watching can see how spread out this thing. I mean, the Franklin Theater kind of makes it look even more ridiculous. But I think you need a figure like Richard Linklater to like galvanize a film community, and we don't have a filmmaker like that. I mean, the reason that Austin can do that is because they have Richard Linklater, and his movies are very, a good majority of his movies, or a not insignificant portion of them, I guess, are inflected by regional Texas sensibilities. I think he's from Huntsville, Texas, and grew up in the Houston area, and then went to community college in Austin, and so he's a Texan, uh, lifelong Texan, and his movies reflect that. We just don't have a Tennessee filmmaker that has been interested in documenting Tennessee or the South. I don't even know if the South has a filmmaker like that at this point. It's interesting because I was talking with someone. Recently. There's all these kind of lifestyle magazines about range life, out in the West, like Montana, Wyoming, etc. That kind of like play up the lifestyle of living on the range in the way that Southern Living or Garden and Gun kind of play up this. Um, I don't know how to describe it. This like kind of affluent Southern leisure culture is what Garden and Gun and Southern Living seem to kind of play into. Um, and but aside from, we don't really, the South in particular, and Texas is kind of somewhere between the two. We don't really have I don't know that there's like this interest in identity in the South anymore, distinct from it being just kind of a place to live. Like like if we're to talk about like a Southern or Tennessee sensibility, what do we mean aside from like a period piece about something that happened in history? It's harder to pin down because as the South has been developed and people have moved here, it's kind of lost a lot of its unique character. I mean, it was very, it was so anyway, that's a total tangent, but
I mean, I think it's right. And the other thing too, I feel like is you've got people in Austin like Richard Linklater, Robert Rodriguez, and they're not really pretentious filmmakers. I mean, they just kind of get the job done and do what they want to do, and they don't have like they're not precious about it in the same way that I feel like
yes,
if you go out and
correct.
talk
They're
to
busy.
people
They're like in the business,
right,
they're making money. They're making their living making films. They're not humoring themselves about. I'm sure they think about themselves as artists, but they're not pretentious about it. They're making films to make money. Like that's what they're doing at the end of the day.
right. And I mean, I don't feel like there's really, you're exactly right. There's not that presence in a lot of areas. I mean, I think the closest we might have is David Gordon Green, who made the new Exorcist movie I'll be talking about in the film rundown, who made movies in North Carolina early in his career that were amazing, incredible Southern films, and then kept that sensibility even whenever he wasn't making movies in the South. I mean, I will say, to give Nashville credit this year, the programming was one of the best years that I've seen. I mean, a lot of stuff just knocked it out of the park, and when it did settle at the Belcourt, it was incredibly well attended. The last screening faux pretty much sold out a theater, so I think that's kind of the way forward for the festival. And I mean, this is an issue for me. I'm a little bit passionate about it because of the fact that it is very important for a community to have an event like this and to showcase our regional talent. And it is frustrating when things like this happen. But yeah, we've got a whole nother year till this comes around again. And we've got all kinds of other exciting cultural events on the fall calendar that we will be covering on the show. So Davis, I know you got to get somewhere. So thank you so much for joining us. And I will see you next week.
All right, great.
Bye. We have a whole year to get prepped for the next iteration of the Nashville Film Festival, which hopefully will be in one place, which has been our battle cry, our battle hymn for most of the past 3 weeks. So we're going to end today, as always, with the weekly film rundown. And going into this week, I was really excited because one of my primary films I've been looking forward to all year is The Exorcist Believer, directed by David Gordon Green, who I mentioned in the last segment. I'm a big fan of the Halloween reboot that David Gordon Green did, the last trilogy that ended with Halloween Ends about this time last year. I wrote about it in the Pamphleteer. This movie's been at the top of my list. Reviews have been really not great. I don't really know what to make of that. I've not had a chance to see the movie yet, but I still have faith in David Gordon Green. No pun intended there for The Exorcist. I know that he knows movies very well. He is very familiar with the original. So I'm still looking forward to this. I will likely have a review published of it in next week's edition, one of the days that we're going to be releasing newsletters for the Pamphleteer. So I'm going to urge everybody to check it out. It is my pick of the week, regardless of the polarizing critical reception. I have noticed that when a movie is this sort of critically reviled and people sort of pile on it, tends to sometimes have a little bit more interesting things to say than one might imagine based on the reviews. And a lot of the critics have seemed to really be taking issue with the movie's presentation of abortion and Catholicism in a way that might not toe the Hollywood party line. So I guess we'll see in a couple of days how that's all going to work out. I'm also very excited about kind of a weird event that's happening in theaters this week. If you know the Spanish filmmaker Pedro Almodovar, amazing director, been around for decades, making this incredible work like All About My Mother, Broken Embraces, Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. He made a couple of shorts during the pandemic. One is called Strange Way of Life, starring Ethan Hawke and Pedro Pascal. And they are basically a group of cowboys in the West that have worked together in the past, and they come back to revisit each other. They may or may not have been together. I mean, this is a Pedro Almodovar movie. He's one of the most famous gay filmmakers there is, but always represents that community in a really interesting and compelling light. And this movie premiered at a bunch of the fall festivals and has had a lot of buzz about it, but it's only an hour long. The short is 30 minutes. There's also another short that is preceding it called The Human Voice with Tilda Swinton, reflecting on a past love with her suitcase. It's supposed to be pretty funny. It's going to be kind of an interesting, non-traditional trip to the multiplex. It's playing at the Belcourt, obviously, but also AMC, Thoroughbred, and a few Regal theaters like Opry Mills. So I'm going to check this one out this week. It's going to be kind of an interesting appetizer, and I would highly recommend you all checking it out. A movie I'm not quite sure about this week that I still want to recommend is Kitty Green's The Royal Hotel. Now, I'm a pretty big fan of Green's documentary Casting Joan Benet. That was about the Joan Benet Ramsey story. It's kind of this interesting self-reflexive. They're trying to cast these people to reenact John Benet Ramsey, and it talks about tabloid sensationalistic news. Great movie on Netflix if you haven't checked it out. I was not a fan of her first feature narrative called The Assistant with Julia Garner, which is this really on-the-nose, broad depiction of an assistant working for Harvey Weinstein. So I don't really know what to make of this movie. I am looking forward to seeing it. It is about two Americans who take a job at a rural Australian outback bar after backpacking and needing some money. And there's been a lot of toxic masculinity talk about it, which gives me some pause because it was very badly handled in The Assistant. So I'm going to be checking this one out. It's one of the more thought-provoking offerings of the week. It is playing at AMC Thoroughbred, Regal Green Hills, and Regal Hollywood 27. I'm also excited about She Came to Me from indie film staple Rebecca Miller. She's married to Daniel Day-Lewis, who is now retired, sadly. She's always makes really light films that also have a little bit of intellectual heft to them. And this is an ensemble romantic comedy that is centered on a New York City composer played by Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones, Half Man. And he is trying to rekindle his romance with Anne Hathaway. Marissa Tomei is in this movie. It looks really good. It's playing at AMC, Thoroughbred 20, and a couple of the Regal theaters as well. One of the more exciting events that's taking place after the Nashville Film Festival is the Belcourt's Halloween film programming. That they always do a really great job. They show Rocky Horror. They have their 12 Hours of Terror event where it's an all-night marathon. But every year they always schedule a horror series around a certain theme. And this year it is Invasion! Exclamation point. Obviously because of the fact that aliens may not exist, and there's whistleblowers and all this wonderful stuff. So this is actually started last week with Men in Black. We fell through the cracks a little bit, but there's a lot of really great movies playing in this series throughout October, including Alien and Predator. We've got some cult flicks like Mars Attacks and It Came from Outer Space in 3D. I'm not the biggest Mars Attacks fan. I kind of think it's Tim Burton's worst movie. People fight me on that all the time. We're also going to be showing Arrival, or the Belcourt's going to be showing Arrival with Amy Adams, directed by Denis Villeneuve, director of Dune. And then there's a little programming for kids, like Muppets from Space. This week, the Belcourt is going to be showing Invasion of the Body Snatchers with Donald Sutherland, a really great paranoid 70s thriller. And they're going to be showing for the kids Lilo and Stitch, which is really Disney's last hurrah for its hand-drawn animation. So I'm going to be checking out some of these, hopefully, over the next little bit. There's a lot of new Bollywood movies opening up, including an H.G. Wells adaptation and a lot of other romantic comedies and thrillers and some other independent films. For those of you that really like Hocus Pocus, which does not include myself, the 30th anniversary re-release of Hocus Pocus is also going wide this week. So Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, Kathy Najimy, if you want to see that. And then A24's AMC Thrills and Chills series continues this week with a encore screening of The Witch, the Robert Eggers movie from 2016, and Ty West's X, which made my top 10 list last year. Really great slasher horror movie that is this wonderful interrogation of aging and what it means to get older. So lots of good stuff coming up, especially for the Halloween box office this week. So we've got a little bit of a brief reprieve until Taylor Swift takes over everything next week with her Eras Tour, already projected to gross $100 million in pre-sales and might be as big as Avengers Endgame. We just don't know yet. So get out, enjoy a flick this week. If you didn't catch Nashville Film Festival, some stuff still available virtually. And that is our show for the first weekend in October. So whatever you do this weekend, give it some thought, and I will see you back here next week. Thanks.